Hey, gang! How's it going? We did it! Huzzah! Excelsior and all that good stuff. How's it going, gang? You all feeling good? Yay! So, I got to do all of the quick checks on everything first. Is the stream going smooth? How's the sound? Was the intro music too loud? All that good stuff. Can I get a heat check from you guys on that? I've been sketching aliens this morning. Little warm ups. Just in case you guys didn't want to do crits to start. Speed's okay. There's no hiccups. I have it set for 60 frames. We're operating off of my laptop, if you can believe it. So that's shocking, really, that I'm using Photoshop that's GPU accelerated. I'm streaming with two screens on. This thing's doing pretty great. I'm impressed. Still, as yet, I have ordered or begun to order a tower setup since I'm going to be on land much more often now. And that's going to take some time to build because the components are all over the place right now. But yeah, soon, hopefully, and then this will not be an issue at all. We'll be able to be blazing. It's going to be great. Zooming in and out. Let's see. Let's do that. That's a good idea. Zoom out. Zoom in. Is it freaking the hell out? Awesome. Hey. MSI laptop from 7 years ago. Kicking ass. Very nice. Cool. So a few of you had work for me to crit. Were you guys interested in doing that over this, or I wanted to give you a last chance out? Oh, saying of which, like, yeah, this is all public, so be careful with your names and information and all that good stuff. I know that a lot of us already have, the patron relationship set up, but at any point we can end up with randos in here. And I didn't advertise this at all, which is, par for the course for me. But eventually I'll start doing that, which means that more people will probably be coming in. So, yeah, watch your information. Classic internet self-security stuff. And if ever you're doing a piece that you do want to crit on that is going to be ultra sensitive or is not, I'd say, PG-13, although I'm going to be pretty filthy on here anyway. But anything you're nervous about, let me know, and then we won't do it. Okay? And we'll do it the old way. But I think this is going to be better. I think this is going to be a good opportunity for us to communicate the ideas back and forth a little bit better, and have it be more like a classroom setting, which is cool for me because it means interaction, which is really a big part of why I like to teach. So let me see, what have you guys been saying over here? Okay, it's running good. Little video jumps. Audio's good. God, that's great. Awesome. Sweet. I am very, very pleased with how this is working out so far, barring, some kind of crash or something. Let's see. Let's go ahead and get started with some crits. I have 3 pieces from you guys. All of them are great. I'm just going to do them in the order they were received. I'm reading, when you guys give me a description of what it is you're looking for crit wise, that helps me a ton because then I know what I can focus on. So I'm just reading through that real quick so that I can be sure that I'm touching on the important issues for you on that piece. Okay. Copy image. File. You know, yeah. New. All right. Here we go. First up, we got Christina's princess character. Very cool. I wonder what happened. There we go. All right. I'm just setting everything back up so I can actually read what you guys are saying. Okay. Very nice. I love the character in this one. Good smarm. Let me get rid of my ruler because it's awful. It's a good expression. All right, first read, definitely in the same vein as things that we've talked about before. You have a lot of detail artifacts that are popping because it's a photo or it's introduced textures, and they're not sitting smoothly. Right here in particular, let me get a better color. And back here. So the artifacting that I'm talking about when I point this out for you guys is generally there's going to be kind of an odd pixelation effect, which creates sharp edges, and those sharp edges draw the eye, and they always will. It's just how detail works. Let me turn down my music. It's totally distracting me. I love me some synth pop, but goddamn, ease up. Speaking of distracting. So they can, the artifacts can pull attention away from your focal point. Now you have good lighting, and there is a really expressive facial expression there, and that's helping. But yeah, just first view, there's a lot of draw in places that you maybe don't want it. And there's another thing that I wanted to talk about. I haven't seen it a ton, but when you guys are using a layer for lighting effects like screen or color dodge, if what you're trying to light is atmospheric and it needs to be voluminous light, use screen. If it's a light source that you need to pop and get really really bright rim color on it so that it looks ultra saturated, really intense light, use color dodge. If you use color dodge on a surface, what color dodge does is it crunches your values, the light side and the dark side, real tight. It's like if we pull up levels. Let's pull up a histogram. No, that's not going to do it. Let's make a levels layer. Okay, so down here you can see the levels, how they're crunched to the left. Most of the values are in the dark. It's a dark piece. What happens with your color dodge is it's going to, in the area that those pixels are affecting, it's going to bunch the values into the dark, and then it's going to bunch them into the light, and everything that's near the middle to the light side becomes really saturated. And it's a cool effect, and it looks awesome, especially when it's a light source itself. But when it's cast on something, it almost always will break your value key. So be careful with color dodge. And that color dodge effect is also what is hurting the nicks. So I noticed you mentioned that you wanted nicks to be legible. It's not reading so well, and it's because there's so many other darks around this detail-wise that are they're drawing away from that. So let's get rid of this. The easiest way to handle this painting-wise would just be to ease up the darks that surround that effect. That's not to say that there aren't shadows, because there are, but you want to keep them within the value key that you've established. And when you have a light source that is this close to a surface, you have to follow the direction of light, because the direction, the spot point is so close to that surface. Like, let's say the spot is the eraser, right? If it's close, then the direction of light, I hope you can see, is going to be pretty extreme in those rays, which means anything that's blocking that light, like this, I don't know if you guys can even see my fingers here. Yeah. Anything that's blocking that light will create a cast shadow. So a light source this close, one of the best ways that you can imply that it's bright isn't by making everything really bright. It's by creating strong cast shadows. So, real quick, you would have cast shadows that run in opposite wherever the light source is. Does that make sense? Okay, so beyond that, that was one of the things that I noticed right away was how the color dodge actually flattened the details that you were after, and it's flattened her arm. She's not. It's the hand isn't standing away from it very clearly. And if you have this bright light source that's in her palm, what's wrong right here? We have a lot of light. So if she's meant to be putting her hand up against that surface, I would go out of my way to make sure that it was clear that there's a cast shadow there. And then what this does is it also frames the words that you're after. Okay, so moving on. I think you did a good job with the posing. That narrative posing's pretty damn clear. There is something about this atmospheric light here that isn't quite working. I like the color. There's good hue intensity in it, and it's covering everything behind it in a nice way, which clearly hints that it's atmospheric light, or that there's light passing through a great deal of volume of particles. But the problem here then is if your light source is warm enough that it's lighting the particles like this, that warmth needs to be transported or delivered onto any surfaces that are facing it. And right now, all of these colors are really cool compared to how brilliant red this light source is. So we can make a new layer. We'll set it to color. Now this is just going to smash it, but it's just to get the point across. That's too ready. A little more orangey. By unifying the temperature, the color temperature of those surfaces that are lit, it'll feel like it's seated in the scene a little bit better. Now, this can become troublesome if you have a client and the client says something like, the hair has to be platinum white. It can be very difficult to introduce, a really crazy light source with a lot of color and pull off what they're after. So sometimes this is where our narrative lighting class comes in. Sometimes it's important to make the decision that the platinum hair is more important than crazy light scheme. Things like the relative color of her eyeshadow, that it needs to behave relative to the lighting scenario that is on that side of the face. So it's too cool and doesn't live in the color key of that side, very much like values work, okay? So I would knock it back just a little bit. It'll still read as green, it just needs to be relatively so. And I see one more quick thing that I can give you here. Uh-oh. Did it freeze? Is it still frozen? How much did we lose? Oh God, it scared me. I'm sitting here just blabbing and nothing's happening. Okay, so Christine said, oh, I see. She's meant to have her hand further away. That's fine. I would let it leak, but because the object is close to another object, so the hand is relatively close, you're still going to have your ambient occlusion shadows. So the light will leak around it, but it still won't be as bright as this. So we can go back to that and I can show you sort of the effect that we're after here. So you would allow a bit of a light leak, not much, and then you would really emphasize the shadow side of the hand. And by emphasizing that value, it shows more light beneath it. So that's how a lot of this works. It's just back and forth play between the lights and darks that you have available to you. As long as you're very strict about the values, you can get away with a lot of very subtle lighting effects, because that's basically how nature works anyway. You just need to be mindful of it. So just that little bit can help with the direction of the light. We can even, you know, if you really wanted to get saucy about it, soften it as it gets further away from your light source, right? And in that same vein, any parallel surfaces, you know, you did hint at the specular, but you want to hit all of the light of the surface that's facing it. It doesn't have to be bright, it just needs to be lit. Does that make sense? Anyway, what I was going to say, see, this is the downside for me actually doing crits live, is I will talk forever, which is not good for anybody. Her hips are dropping down, and we can see the bulge. Oops, we can see the bulge of where the head of the femur should be. It's hinted at right there. God damn you, layers. It's hinted at right there, but it's not connecting to anything. You see how the cloth is dropping off right there? What this needs is just a little bit of fill out, and it's not even, you wouldn't even need to change that much. It's just about making sure that the light is hitting the top edge of that mass. That's it. Just to give it a little bit of roundness and form. See the difference? You guys still with me? Double checking. Okay. I'm not sure what the latency is, how far behind you guys are. It's hard to tell. But anyway, did you have any other specific questions, Christina? Just gonna doodle with this until you guys catch up. And it can be, so this is where, like, I don't know, different people seeing different things in different ways can change that. It might be that that's just too much, but we don't need so much but we definitely need, you know, the form. We need that shape. I would, just to delineate this thigh action, because there are actually several spots where it ends up flattening out, is all of the clothing here is on a flat ellipse, and it's not actually circling the form. Material rendering, okay. You need actual, when you're drawing like belts around something, you want to draw through the object and make sure that you're getting the ellipse correct, so that it's not squishing the thing, which is also kind of what's happening here. So one of the ways out of that, outside of redrawing these belts, is making sure that you do your overlaps. So I'm adding more light to the front edge of this rim to make it clear that this is overlapping in the front of that. And I would even kind of maybe set up some reference to check your wrinkles, because they're a little bit off there. All right. So, last chance questions. Material rendering on clothing. Elaborate. How can I help with that? Gotta watch out with this 3D, the blocking of light sources. You gotta be extra mindful when you're using complex lighting situation like this. guys still with me? Okay. Upper part read as cloth and the legs read as leather. Yes, they do. Um, they read correctly, but I think that you could push it more. Um, a lot of that, a lot of what's going on that is gonna make it difficult to do your material rendering here is that you're you're doing an overlay screen bloom for the atmosphere, and it's not uniform. It's not covering everything it should. So sorry, you guys. It's ending up with stronger blacks, especially in the like the knee area, and the darkest shadows over here where it's a cast shadow from the dress is too light. Uh, when you have disparate materials near each other in the same lighting scenario, it's better to err on the side of making sure that the lighting scenario is uniform on both than it is to worry about effects. And the reason the reason for this is you want to handle the lighting direction, you want to handle the material definition, the contrast drop off before you do something like a bloom effect where it's a light with atmosphere, light hitting atmosphere over the top of everything. So it prevents like a big shift in the value key between one material and another that makes them live outside of the same lighting scenario. So I hope that makes sense. This render came out nice. I like that. Let's see. So was this from the 3D program too? It's a pretty cool little... That fill light is nice. It's a cool thing to pay attention to. In fact, I think that may be what your leather needs up here. Does that make sense? If you approached this exactly the same way as you did it down here, that would feel more correct, more like leather. Right now it's a symbol for leather and it works and I understand it, but you could push it and get a more realistic, clearer rendering of everything. Okay. Cool. Nice work. Let's see. All right. Okay, so now we've got Irina's piece. How do I pronounce your name? Is it Irina or Irina? I'm going the Latin route. It's all that Spanish. Um, Good to see you guys. Yeah, this is so much better than typing it out. All right, so the big question, it looks like, for you, Irina, until you correct me, is that their pose felt a little bit off for your storm elemental. How do you like it? That's what matters. Okay. So I would say the big kind of jump for me right away. I mean, first of all, very cool, and I can definitely see like this was you were breaking out of your your norm for this one, so it must have been quite challenging, which is good. Um, Composition is quite interesting. Everything's directed, sweeping to the one side. It feels pretty dynamic, but you are totally right. Where the denominating, whatever, where that's falling short is in the pose or the features of your critter there. So I think the best way to approach this would be to think about how how storms actually look. Like right now, it's you're following the human part of it a little more than is necessary. You could probably get away with making it quite twisted or twisty or twistery because puns. Let's just grab it and see what we can do with it. One of the things I think that's very important with like this kind of storm is making sure that the what's the word for it, like the helix, the spiral of it gets that tightened bottom where you're going to get the intensity of the spout or the tornado, whatever it might be. And you can, if you look at, I'm just going to say not save, but input it as it is, apply the transformation. But if you look at a lot of storms, there's an interesting rhythm to them, and I'm sure you looked at lots of reference for this. But you know, from the top, you know, from a side view, there's kind of a, you know, the funnel shape, and the funnel shape can kind of drift around. You know, it's like the same shape that you see when water's going down the drain. It's like it can kind of whip around and be very dynamic. So there's a missed opportunity here to go extra dynamic. You may have, part of the story may be that it's a chonky guy, which is fine, but we can undulate the surface, make interesting waveform patterns and things like that. So actually I'm super hesitant to paint on it because it's so nicely rendered. Soften the edges there. Another thing would be, so you have, it looks like the creature is sitting in front of the sun, so it's completely backlit, and it looks like everything else is kind of supporting your lighting direction here to imply that that's the sun there. So that's cool. How you want to amplify that effect would be to make sure that where the bloom is happening, coming through all that atmosphere, it's rich and saturated, and then as the storm gets further away from your initial light source, it can darken and become less saturated. So this bottom part can go real dark. I think also, if you were to do this from scratch again, one of the things that you could get away with is really pushing these sweeping, curving shapes and undulation in the wind and the spiral to give it, to tell the story of this thing, because maybe it's aggressive. Like you could show an aggressive tornado just depending on how you arrange the shapes. Or maybe it's shocked, like, oh shit, I just appeared out of nowhere. Or if it's meant to be kind of this god, it looks like, you know, this is a worshiper, maybe it's a godlike spirit. You can have more of an imposing, which I guess kind of what you were going for, a more imposing kind of confident pose. And then this is another part where you can do scale, is implying the contact point. So your contact point is massive. If you made it small, that actually makes him or it look much larger. This is the whale's eye theory of scale that I've talked with you guys about before. And you want to make sure, again, always, that you're indicating the horizon and the three-dimensionality of it. So if this thing is way above us, you want to make sure that that those rings of atmosphere are going to tilt up away from us. Right now, your creature and the foreground figures are simultaneously existing in two different focal depths, two different lens distances, and it's breaking the shot. The distant creature is in a wide angle shot, like it's close up, and your close up figures are in a zoom shot, so it looks like the camera's far away and all of the perspective is mashed. So just a quick shorthand for that would be, let's make a new layer. Your horizon is something like this, maybe a little lower. back here with this creature, with a telephoto lens, which is what the foreground figures are being shot at. We wouldn't see the deep perspective and that push up. That fisheye doesn't happen with that because there's so much light moving through that lens. So, whoops, damn it. What we would do instead is flatten it out. At a distance, it would be much more flat, which could be good. It can give you it can add to that gigantic size feel of it. Because this thing is so high and the clouds are going to be high, that curve that you've got in the clouds here makes it feel, that even adds further to the wide angle lens thing. And it's again, it's breaking the shot. So what I would do is think about the horizon, that flat horizon, and the storm would be flat on that horizon too. And then your creature would loom out over that. But it would be significantly less. If this is your horizon, right? As an ellipse moves away from the horizon, it becomes more visible to see under it, right? And the more, the closer the camera is, and the wider the angle, the wide angle shot, the deeper that disconnect becomes, and the segments of a cylinder would show the bottom of that ellipse more quickly, and it creates that perspective illusion. So with a telephoto lens like this, that shift is very slow, very slow. So we wouldn't even see the bottom end of that circle until it was outside of the cone of vision. Is this all making sense? Just double checking. I'm not speaking gibberish to you guys. And then that smaller impact storm, which actually makes it feel bigger. And then to get a little that strength of pulling in the clouds, like you were talking about, Irina, I think it would be, when we're talking about narrative posing, you would think about it like the tension of pulling something towards it, like this is an Atlas moment or a Hercules moment. And I would actually bend the arms and make it feel like it's pulling, like bringing in those clouds. You gotta make tiny, tiny, tiny eyes for something so big. Grrr. Squishy Michelin Man. On examples of what, Irina? Examples for perspective? This is like the wacky, wavy, inflatable tube man. And this would be with the limbs. It would be a great place to kind of do really dynamic, deep implications. Now, because I've stated that the storm is going to be more. We need to see it in the horizon itself. This would be a good spot where, okay, it's drawing in all of that energy and the darkness of the storm, and it gives us a nice framing effect where we can put the sun. And you can really hint, we can really get in there like you did in some of those details and imply like the scale of the thing, because it's drawing in, tiny wisps and things like that. And you vary that, big wisps and little wisps and big puffy bits. and it's gonna, by varying it significantly, especially getting that tiny brush in there, you're gonna get a lot more scale payoff. Ah, yes. Okay. So perspective and lens matching. Where I learned it, so I had a perspective class in college, and it was extremely in depth. And the requirement for the whole class, we didn't have assignments per se. We had a single project. Oh, no. Hopefully, I didn't change the light too much. We had a single project where we basically had to make our own book on perspective, and it was super intensive. And we covered shit that it's so hard and it takes so much time to map things out, like reflections on reflections with spiraling staircases. It was a shit show. But later on, and I aced it, A plus, right? But later on, I actually found a book called Perspective for Comic Book Art, or Perspective for Comics Art, by a guy named Dave something, I think it was. And I think I've recommended it before. And he explains perspective for comics, and honestly just any image making, in a comic. The whole book is a comic book, and you can go through it and follow the story along, and it's so good. It's really fun. No, not Scott Robertson's book. I did have classes with him. His perspective is spot on. The guy is so good at drawing in perspective, but it can be very. For me, it was very dry and very like. It didn't have. There were a lot of times where I was like, "How does this apply to what I need to know now?" And that's where a lot of people get lost in some of that more academic type learning. That's why I think something that kind of cartoonifies it almost makes it much easier to learn. Okay. Uh, all right. So you understand what I'm saying about the elemental, right? I can kind of leave that one now, or did you need more for that? So I can answer your next question. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to belabor points. That's the one thing I want to avoid with this. So anytime you guys are getting it, and I'm just carrying on, and it will happen. Just go, Izzy, we get it. Shut up. All right. So how you would do the opposite in order to make the characters in a wide angle situation would be to remember that uh, focal depth, when we're talking about lenses, is dependent on the actual literal depth of the lens itself. The longer that depth is, the more it's going to be able to absorb light at this sort of. Oh God! See, this gets into the technical stuff, and I'm not super good at explaining that. The best way to think about it is, let's just go with that. The best way to think about it is with a long telephoto lens. It's more like a laser. You're getting a very narrow picture of the thing, and it's going to capture that thing from that narrow, distant perspective. And then the wide angle is more like a shotgun because it's really wide open. You're capturing everything. So when you're capturing everything in a wide angle, from a wide angle perspective in an image like this, what's going to happen is kind of like with Christina's light source. Remember how when it was up close, you're going to see pretty drastic cast shadows, just like that. The same thing happens with the perspective on a wide angle lens, because the lens, instead of being really far away, I don't know if you guys can see the distances here, instead of the lens being really, really far away and getting a laser flat shot of everything, it's getting a shot like this from here to here. There's a big arc to it. And this is what creates your fisheye lens effect. So everything ends up looking like it's curved like this. You see? Okay? Because it's picking up the light as rays coming in. It's just picking up from a broader, wide angle. So that's why it's called that. Okay, so then we go, what we would do is if that lens is pitched forward and we're much, much closer and we're using the wide angle lens, everything's going to feel like it's looming. Everything feels more dramatic. That's why lenses can be very important when you're trying to tell something narratively. Again, check out cinematographers, get online and see why they use the lenses that they use in a story. And and you can see when you'll start to notice it once you learn the difference between a wide angle and a telephoto or a long lens. You'll start to see it in shots in movies. We're like, oh, okay, they wanted the characters to look really close, really personal, or they wanted to be looming, or they wanted the characters to feel distant from each other. And there's very specific choices for those lenses. And it's really good to learn because when you're painting, you can't mix them. If you want it to feel realistic, you can't mix a wide angle and a telephoto lens in the same shot. It just won't look right. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. So what you would get, actually let's get a bright red. Horizon is gonna remain the same. Let's transform it a little bit so it's more accurate. Your horizon remains the same, but instead of having those slow ellipses like I showed you before, what's going to happen is from whatever your vanishing point is, things will look like they loom. There'll be a curve to it. So this guy, even though he's in a wide angle position relative to our foreground, it's not the correct shape to be true wide angle. So he would actually be looming towards us, and the perspective would go that way. And you're going to have, so for your ellipses, you'll have your narrow ellipses like this, but they're going to be really extreme, really fast, to the point where it's going to look like things are outside the cone of vision and thus distort. Wide angle, if used kind of carelessly, can look really, really distorted and wrong. So, and that's even with a photo. I'm sure you've seen it, like a bad unwrap of like a 180 or a 360, panoramic view. What are those things called? The 360 views images. If they're unwrapped, they look weird, right? That's basically what we're talking about, is a wide angle that's so wide that it's pulling light from places that our eyes can't really, we don't see that way. Okay. So your foreground figures are going to do the same thing, but kind of the opposite. These will be, because they're on another side of this curvilinear perspective that we now have, I'm going to go ahead and draw the grid for this. That's a little too much. Oops. I got to make the thing smaller so I can draw it. Shit. This is really hard to draw. And just imagine it going the other direction, because I'm a good drawer guy. So when your figures are closer with a wide angle lens, they're going to be way closer. So this guy in the distance, because he's pretty distant, might, and this would help with that size thing. This is like a Godzilla shot, right? Your character would be, this is just a compositional thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'd be that much closer. But if you did switch, if this was a photo shot, they would actually look like they're closer to us with a wide angle lens. And it would be very extreme. So we would see like the hood, things, the distance between things gets really, really dramatic. With a telephoto lens, things get flatter. A perfect example comes from, and it's the one I always think of when I think of describing this, the difference between the telephoto and the wide angle, is it's a sequence from that perspective for comic book artists that I told you about. And what they do is they show one of the characters at a specific distance, and he holds his hand out in front of his face, and his hand is about the same size as his face. And then when you're looking at a wide angle, which we kind of have right here, you can see that my hand is way bigger than my face, relatively speaking. So that's what happens, is it punches distances very significantly. So this rock may feel about the distance that it's at, and then of course this creature would feel like it's way, way far away as a result. Okay. So does that make sense? Does that answer your question, like about the shapes? Okay. Did you guys have any other questions about this one? Kind of the same thing. It's gonna be so. Oops, I wish I had kept the horizon line separate, but oh well, we'll do it again. All right, so where the character's at, if we're talking about just keeping it the same size, then these objects that are near her but further away would be smaller. And she would wrap around your curvilinear perspective more. So it would look, the limbs would look more stretchy. They'll always, like, anytime you're working with wide angle, it's gonna look like morphed or warped a little bit. Um, yeah, especially so the thing when we're talking about the size difference that happens as a result of the lens, the a wide angle lens, the sizes really get wonky when we talk about depth. If if it's in the same plane as her head, it's going to be about the same. But if you move her hands forward even a little bit, it can become very drastic to the point where maybe you don't see so many details of fingers and things like that. But the closer with a wide angle lens, the closer the figure or whatever it is to the camera, the more extreme this effect is. So if she were up close to us and she put her hand out, her hand would look really tiny compared to her body. So the further away she gets, that gets mashed down a little bit, but that's when you start throwing in your curvilinear perspective where things kind of will tilt. So this thing, whoops, the golem back here would tilt quite a bit. She's not going to tilt a ton, but you're going to see greater differences in size and relative to distance from her. Does that make sense? This is a tough one because I can explain it to you, and there is logic to it, but it's really one of those things that's difficult to intuit. So you need to look at photo reference of this. And I mean, you were asking about where you can see stuff like this. The best place to look would be looking at cinematography, looking at film, rather than just trying to do a Google search. Google's great, but we can't depend on Google for everything. So try to develop a good memory for shots or scenes, and if you can remember, like, oh, this is kind of like that shot, you can look it up, and then you get to watch the movie again, which is fun, and grab that clip. You're not going to find these kinds of effects and details easily online. This is something you really have to hunt for. Take care, gang. Those of you that are leaving, no worries. So we'll move on to Josh's, I think. What was the next one? Yeah. Great job, Irina. That's a nice one. And I'm really proud of you for going outside of your comfort zone. That's really hard to do. Yeah, Sergio's right. You can do a lot of reference photos from your phones now. A lot of phones, even mine, which is relatively old at this point, I think this is like 3 years or 4 years old, has it can do what do you call it? 3D, like two cameras, style shots, and it has a wide angle and a narrow focus lens. I don't think it has both on the front. Oh, it does. So, I mean, you can do it. Most modern phones will have a wide angle option, so you can experiment with this and play with things like get Get an object like get a clear glass like this. Pull up my stream so I can actually see if these things are in frame. You want to get a clear glass that's like straight. This one's got kind of a curve to it, but get one that's straight. And if you can, draw with a Sharpie around it so that you get these black lines that'll give you your cylinder, right? And take photos from a distance with a telephoto style lens, and then take photos up close, and then also from a distance with a wide angle lens, and see how it plays, because it's going to change those shapes very significantly. Cheers. See you, Christina. All right. So, Josh, you still with us? Very sexy. Love this. Good dynamicisms. That's the word that I made up. I'd say first pop, the thing that's kind of standing out to me is your fire effects are not working here. Again, kind of like in one of the previous ones, the symbol of the thing is clear, and I understand what it is that you're trying to say, and it's perfectly functional. People would get it. It's clear enough. But if you're going for accuracy, you need to dig out that fire reference. It's going to be really important with something like this, especially with movement. Essentially, what I'm seeing is you've got this is the big tell, like the number one tell for fire effects when somebody is, one, using Photoshop, and two, is not applying the logic to a light source itself, is you will see colors like this, where there is no saturation around it. And what this is this is a white, this is a bright color that was either erased away or was not painted through, not backed with smoke or any other of the elements that are necessary to create fire. Whoops, I'm on your actual layer. If the fire is this dim and it's not generating light, it has to be more saturated and much dimmer. So these colors would definitely be more applicable, and maybe not even that. It needs to be even more saturated than that. When you have fire moving, and again, like, dig up some images of fire dancers and things like that to really get a look at this effect. This is also another thing where cameras are going to make a huge difference. A camera that's got low exposure is going to squash all the lights of the fire, and it's going to just make the fire look like a really white color with a very sharp edge of intense hue. So light. Let me show you the difference between the two. This would be kind of what you see with a low exposure. It's not even saturated enough. Where the banding is very, very tight. You won't see much of the little flame effects. The band is going to be super tight. Might even make that more saturated. And then it's just going to pop. It's almost pure white with just that little band of color on the outside. And then when you have a camera that's going to be taking a little bit, it's taking in more light subtly, and it's blocking that high end. So it's for a lower exposure or a higher exposure. I confused myself. That's when you're going to see the kind of fire that you're seeing right now with yours, which is going to show us more of the subtlety and ribboning of the element, which is what you're after here. So if that's the case, you can't have bright whites which are just ending up dimmed down because you've erased them out or just didn't want them visible. You have to go to saturation and dimness instead. With those, you're going to have the full gamut. So Your fire will build up, just as we talked about in the effects material class. You're going to have a very nice, slow buildup of the light with lots of variance of saturation and lots of opportunities to explore that kind of waveform shape. Is this CMYK? No, it can't be, right? Yeah. For some reason, the colors feel a little bit off to me. But it could be also I'm painting in a very high glare environment and my screen is a little janky. So if I'm actually wrong about my notes here, I blame that. Is this making sense what I'm talking about, Josh? Okay. All right. So that's the big one that jumped out right away, is that this feels like either you had fire reference or something like that and then just smeared it around with a smudge brush. So that means that values that shouldn't exist out of their area are being pulled all over the place. I got confused on high or low. So a high exposure would be you're taking in all of the brights so that you can see more of the shadows. I've confused myself with that. I'm gonna have to think about it. But essentially, the two differences of the exposures would be one is going to crunch your lights and the other is going to crunch your darks. The one that crunches your lights allows you to see more of the shadow, and you have more values you can play with in shadow. The one that crunches your darks does the opposite. You have more light that you can play, and this is something that we talked about in the last episode. Does that make sense? I forget. I'm sorry. I'm just spacing it. I'm thinking about other stuff right now, but that's essentially what's going on here. Is you got to choose which one it's going to be. This is clearly the one where you want to see more of your values. That in the dark side, the midtones and the dark side, we're going to see all of our values. So you can punch your lights more with this. The biggest issue isn't so much the exposure, it's that you have pulled values for the substance outside of where they belong. You're not going to see these sort of dim, kind of grayish reds coming out on the outside of the fire. Do you see how it looks wrong here? Does that make sense? It's a value and hue relationship more than anything. When you're working with fire or any kind of lighting effect, the layering is super important. You know, rich and saturated on the outside and dark, and then you get lighter and lighter. If you want to keep it a bright light, you want to keep it saturated, undulate your temperatures, but you can't have the banding exist outside of the other banding or it'll look wrong. It'll feel incorrect. Okay, so moving on. There's a lot of graphic stuff happening with the rendering of the creatures and the characters themselves, which are flattening it a little bit or making it feel less realized. So this would be, you know, a fur rendering thing, but the fur is following a plastic material recipe rather than the fur material recipe, which when you're thinking about fur, as I've said before in the fur material classes, you don't have to think about individual hairs, but you have to think about the behavior of light affecting individual hairs. You went to clumping without paying attention to how the light would hit these surfaces. So because it's dim, it's not an end of the world situation, and it reads as fur, but what we're doing right now, almost all of the lighting here is operating on symbol rather than logic. Does that make sense? So if you want it to get realistic rather than stylized, you got to lean more towards the logic. And I'm not saying stylized is bad at all. In fact, there's a lot of artists that totally pull off stylized lighting and in their book covers, and it looks amazing. So one I'm thinking of, I actually just saw, he just did a new piece, John Foster. He has realistic lighting, but then there's also a lot of stylized stuff going on with his materials, and it looks awesome. So if that's what you're after and that's what the client wants, that's what you got to do. So again, these notes are just kind of, just to help out if you want to improve that part towards the realism. So with that in mind, we have things like her pants are not being lit. This is kind of the hard thing about doing magic effects is you'll have a light source essentially that's being swirled all around the image, and it seems like it's going to light everything evenly. If you look up, fire dancers are a great place to look for this kind of thing. But if you look at long exposure shot that they do, where they're like whipping the light around, and it just makes a big streak of light, you can see that where they're lit follows that almost like it's a halo of light, and that halo is lighting all around their form in the same way. So you would need to do that with this as well. And the problem with what's not happening here is that the light is not affecting everything as it should. So you have hinted at the light on her arm, but again, because you have the fire is not behaving like fire right now. You've lit it with that yellow, with the lightest light of the fire, and that's not going to be how this works. Fire is a very dim light source, and in general, fire is not going to give you a desaturated, brighter version of light on a surface than it is itself. This is actually true of any light source. It can't make something brighter than it is itself. You're welcome to try. Show me a photo if you could pull it up. But that color that's on her should be much warmer. All of the light that's coming and being emitted from that ribbon of light needs to be as warm as that light, and less as warm and as saturated as that light, and less bright. It can never be as bright as the original light source. So I'm warming it up and I'm dimming it down, and you're going to find that it's going to seat the shapes a little bit better. And I really like your instinct to make her and the wolf desaturated while having a very saturated light source is a really good one. You just got to stick with it. See how here it's so desaturated, and I can see why. I can see how it happens, because her skin is so desaturated. You start thinking, the light source isn't going to make it more saturated, but in this case it has to, because you've made a stylistic decision, and that light source, if you want it to behave, has to be the color. There's some definite anatomy wiggles happening here, but we won't deal with that for now. See how warm it is here? You totally got the right idea here. But I think it's because you were thinking that it's lit from this. Which it is, and it should be. But you should apply that same reasoning everywhere. Hopefully you're seeing what I'm talking about. And again, because she's being surrounded by light, look at those long exposure shots of the fire dancers and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's where light breaks a lot of rules. And you should be decisive about this. The logic of light would dictate that you're going to have it everywhere, and basically she's just glowing from everywhere. This is where narrative lighting comes in. We don't want to necessarily draw attention to, specific shapes, or we want to make sure that overlap is clearer. This is where you make some artistic decisions. Like, I think in this shadow is a great spot to have a very strong indication of that color. There's something going on with her jaw that's kind of weirding me out. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so you can play when you're doing something like this where you have a ribbon of light and it's going all over the place. You can totally play with the temperatures to hint where the light is closer and maybe make it brighter and a little bit more saturated. Or you can go in the opposite, what I've done here, and make the shadow side more saturated to kind of create an interesting rim light. This is 100% what we're talking about with narrative lighting. You're going to have to make a lot of bullshit decisions right now. The hair, I mean, you can go a lot of ways with this. You can do kind of a rim slash fill like this and imply intensity. And then you can also imply intensity by doing let's get something a little dimmer. A solid silhouette bloom. So this might be a fun spot to do this kind of effect. See how I'm layering? That one value cannot exist outside the other value. We can go punch it really hard in a little bit of ribboning. And then we could do something like grabbing that dark, rich red and imply, actually that's not even enough, and imply that the light is coming through the hair by using the new shadow color, that silhouette color being very, very saturated. Does that make sense? Anytime you're painting magic, look at fire dancers. Look at flamethrowers and fire dancers. Look at magic is such a unique, specific kind of thing to try and paint. And it's I think weirdly, everybody can kind of tell when it's wrong. And the way that you can lend weight and reality to the magical effects in your painting is pick up that, rewatch the material effects class and pay close attention to the logic of how light should behave. And then when you invent things that don't make sense in terms of physics, at least the physics of the light will still behave. And it'll be more settled and realistic. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, this is a great little trick. And of course that means that a lot of the hair can be much, much darker where it leads into that silhouette effect. You have a fill light in the cool part of her face. When you have this is a good idea again, that's what gives it that nice gray against orange play. You want to make sure that you have a dominant light source and that your other light sources support it. Otherwise, you can end up, at best, graphic, at worst, spotty. So, what I would do for this, because it's starting to feel a little bit spotty, I'm going to get rid of all the saturation there. Okay. See how it gets really bright and pops a little too much in these areas? It's because skin lives in midtones. Most skin is just midtones, unless we're talking about moist, sweaty, oily, things like that. That's when you start getting really strong speculars. And even then, with an oily face like mine, for instance, you're only going to get the speculars in specific places where the skin is stretched taut. So you want to tone down the value jumps, especially if it's a fill light. Because the fill lights, the purpose of the fill light, like we talked about in the last class, is to soften those sharper features. So let's turn back on our color and let's just knock these down a little bit. Not much. You're really close. Remember, of course, that all the light, all of the cast shadows and all of the form shadows need to follow the direction of your light source. And your light source, if it's above, right? If your light source is like this, coming down, then if you have a really strong light on that left temple of hers, it's going to look like that's actually poking out, like she's got some kind of Elephant Man style disfigurement right there. which should actually be the closest to that light source, is covered by hair. We can't see it. So we may not even see much pop light there. Right. That can happen where you change your mind on a lighting scenario as you're painting. Totally fine. It happens all the time. Just make sure that you go back and double check it so that everything still feels cohesive in the end. And again, this is really minor. I mean, you did a really good job. This is just nitpicking at this point. Bringing it back under control just a bit. See how even the spot's starting to feel like it stands out too much? Be careful about your form shadows. They need to have, the soft side needs to face the light source. If you don't, it's going to create a cast shadow, and it makes really sharp shapes where you may not want them. And right now, this brow ridge is very sharp. My nose is very itchy, but we're not supposed to touch our face. But I love touching my face. I gotta do it. Gotta do it. I'm breaking all the rules. I'm a rebel. And here, I'm even gonna accentuate the cranium a little bit more. This is actually a problem that I have all the time, is I'll forget to really account for that forward dome shape on the forehead, and because you get the anime concept where everything just gets flattened, and even on a female skull, there is a bit of a dome shape to it. It's subtle, but it's there. All right. Stop touching your face, gang. Cast shadow. Again, there's anatomy wonk here. We won't get into it right now. I think it's the materials that are really standing out, and I think that's what you specifically asked about too. There's the wrinkles on these the pants. So you want to be careful. This happens a lot with the different paintings that I've seen over the years with you guys. Is that you get into, and again I do this too, so that's why I'm extra aware of it. But you get into a pattern when you're doing a painting where strokes and shapes will follow a certain rhythm, and you end up creating rhythms. And what will happen is that it makes the different materials look like the same material. So the fur has these short curved shapes, whoop, whoop, little medium short lines, and then the pants do too. So the pants being a different color and being lit slightly differently does help, but watch out for rhythm. Remember, you don't want to have any two things be too much alike in a painting. That's your golden rule. And then of course just reference, because this pinch, you're missing that really nice opportunity to have a good big pinch fold. And then I would probably, because this light source is so close and on top, I would actually pay attention to that and let it overwhelm your fill where it's close. Just where it's close can be very subtle effect. Same thing. This is just something that I do all the time, so I always watch out for it. It's just making the same wrinkle again and again and again, and that's just not how this works. Another thing is, material-wise, you have the pants very tight up on the thigh and the hip. It's normal. That's what we do. You got to make sure that you're following that same rule of material for the entirety of the pant leg. So up here it's a little bit more snug. You can definitely allow it to be wrinkled on the bottom, but you want to follow that same unless it's bell bottoms, the cut, there's usually, especially with, you know, the style of pants that we see most of the time now, there's a regular fit to the cut and it goes all the way down. So just keep that in mind. It's a minor thing. You missed some good opportunities to do fun lost and found edges down here, where you could have done the fur and then had it, you know, drop away. And then there's some more anatomy wonk going on there. It doesn't look like it looks blocky. I'm seeing the construction of it, but it's not feeling quite right, and it's because it's not following that shape for the anatomy. It looks like you might have pulled the anatomy from a slightly different position or pose, because the eyes look like they're pretty well placed, but the nose got a little, just a little bit. Okay, so that's the big stuff. Any questions? And then if you guys want to just hang out after I'm done here, I'm going to just continue painting for a little bit longer, maybe another 20 minutes, playing with my aliens, and we can just chat about whatever. And of course, if you guys enjoyed this and enjoyed chatting with everybody else, please invite more people. I'm going to try and advertise a little bit, even though I despise advertising. I'll try and do a little bit of posting before I do this stuff, because the more people that we can get following on here, maybe the more people we can bring back to Patreon with us and help us learn all together, which is super fun. We'll do a little bit at a time, Josh. I want to make sure that the notes that we're talking about we absorb. If you're going to be working on this piece more before, I think you mentioned that it's due this month, we can do we can talk a little bit more about it, because I'm planning on streaming. I'm thinking weekly on Wednesdays, and then depending on how this goes and how successful it is, I might do a little bit more. Excuse me. So do another pass if this is actually an assignment. Do another pass with that lighting, because I think that's actually the weakest spot. Damn it! Sorry guys, seltzer, burpee times. Work on that lighting, and we can post it up on the Discord, and we can talk about it and examine it further. But I think you've got a lot to walk away with already right now. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for posting those, guys. It's fun to crit them, and y'all did a real good job. Man, I'm loving seeing the improvement here. It's very, it's clear. Everybody's getting better, and that makes me so happy. All right, I'm gonna close this out, and I'm gonna keep painting my goofy creatures, and I'll be here. So if you got questions or anything like that, feel free to post. Thank you guys. It was good. I think this is definitely the better way to do it. My go-to when I'm like just shooting the shit is just to paint funny aliens. I love painting funny aliens. They're so shapy. Yeah, I've always been nervous about doing streams because I have such severe painter face. I'll just get in there like, oh. So that's part of why I have avoided it in general, but I guess you guys will just have to get used to it and learn to enjoy my total potato. Irina, yes, that's the one, the David Chelsea book. Um, I don't. I think I have seen the Vanishing Point book in bookstores back when I was in like late high school, early college, or something like that. There was a bunch of anime style support books and comic support books coming out at the same time. Out of the two of them, I much prefer the David Chelsea one. That's just personal preference. They're probably both excellent and probably both give you the exact same information because perspective is hard and fast rules. You can't really fuck with them. Um, the David Chelsea one is the one that I learned from. It was very concise, very clear, and it builds well, which is something I, as a patron of mine, you probably notice. I'm a big fan of making sure that information compounds in a way that is logical and easy to understand, and I think he does that really well. It's part of the reason why it's not something I ever really want to get into because there's so many examples of really good perspective teachers, and he's definitely one of them. Have you guys been doing sketches for yourselves lately? Painting silly critters or anything? I've seen a lot of you guys doing the daily challenge stuff. Man, making me look bad. I have not been very good about sketching lately. And now that I'm back on land and even back in the States, I got to start thinking about a portfolio again. I haven't really thought about that in a long time. So, what kind of places do I want to work? What kind of gigs do I want to welcome? Do I want to keep just doing this? I mean, like, this has been pretty great. If I can get, big support doing Twitch and things like that, maybe then. Damn it! I'll turn this off. Sorry, guys. What was I saying? Oh yeah. If this ends up being a viable thing, I can just keep doing this, and I'm happy to do that. But I really like working with people, and I like projects. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. The future is so unclear right now, right? It's like kind of crazy to try and plan anything almost. I'm gonna have to message back real quick. That's the adoptee mom asking me about lunchies, so I gotta handle that. 1 second. Forgive me, I know this is super bad juju, but it is what it is. I'm only a man. You got to respond to the mom. It's like it's a hard and fast rule. Usually when I'm drawing aliens, it's the I think like breaking shape first, but I've always been conscious of for concept art in particular dealing with mask making that you have to account for a person inside, and I try to even with my ridiculous aliens try to think about how it might actually be made as a practical effect. Oh, you guys have been chatting. Oh, Irina, you could totally do this. It's not a nerves thing. It's almost like you're just hanging out by yourself, and then it's just talking while you work. Basically, it's not terrible. The Loomis book on anatomy is great, and it deals the anatomy book, and there's a drawing book that he does. It's excellent, in regard to figures and perspective, and it's right up your alley for what we're dealing with right now. I learned a lot from those Loomis books. In particular, like there's a great shorthand rule, and I think I've mentioned it before, where you figure out where your figure is on the horizon line, and if you have similarly sized figures, wherever that horizon line crosses, that's where they all should be placed. So if it crosses at their knee, you shrink them into the distance and make sure that their knees cross at the horizon line. Or if it's, you know, two or three um, uh, body lengths above their head, you make sure that everybody is 2 or 3 body lengths shorter as they miniaturize going into the distance. It's great simple rule to live by. Age. We'll never get there, but it's fun to try. COVID here. COVID's been interesting here in the Pacific Northwest. Uh, we are light on cases and light on deaths. I think we're in the hundreds, but it's not. Most people here are not most, but a good portion of people here are pretty liberally minded, especially in Portland. And they're being conservative about um, taking COVID risks. So so far so good. I am very concerned about where government's at right now in regards to wanting to open up prematurely. Um, we really don't seem to have much of a plan in place right now. So the states, we're kind of shitting the bed a little bit, but as long as most people try to keep this under wraps, because I totally understand where people are coming from. I mean, with not having work, you know, how do you pay for anything? I get that, but the problem is that they think that they need to go to work to get the money when we should be getting help from the government right now. Like if anyone needed a bailout, it's us, and it's right goddamn now. So we'll see how it plays out. Fingers crossed. So far, so good here. Families safe. We're in a little tiny bit of property here. There's like 4 or 5 of us at any given time. The pod, and we're still even amongst us, we're practicing social distancing because, you know, we want to avoid any infection here. Um, I've got people here that are immunocompromised, and I've got people here that are older or at risk. So I got to be really careful. It's tough. I miss hugs. That's like the thing I miss the most. Let's see. Sergio, I am still totally doing Magic the Gathering illustrations. They're just sort of like, it's just part of my lifestyle now. I just do them. So I actually just got a big contract, and I'll be doing, I think, 6 or 7 new ones. But anytime I'm working on a new card, and I almost always am, the cards I'm working on won't be released for a year at fastest, at least a year. So yeah, I can't show any of that stuff, unfortunately. I've done a couple that I liked lately. It comes in waves. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes I don't like my paintings that much. But it is always going to be there. As long as they'll hire me, I'm happy to do it. I enjoy doing the Magic cards, and I love the community. I even love to play when I can. The problem is I just never have time. Yeah, Josh. Definitely look at John Foster, another guy I like a lot that kind of is in that vein. He's an Australian painter, and he does these really graphic things. Oh, damn it. I'm spacing on his name suddenly. It'll come to me. He did the Popbot series. You should check it. You should check out his stuff too. He's really good at that. It's not about materials. It's about the stroke. It's about the shapes. It's very shapy, cool line work. Ashley Wood, that's the name. Ashley Wood, great painter. Yeah, economy right now it's a tough thing. I mean, you're gonna when we're talking about this kind of problem, the economy can't exist if people are dead. So it's gonna have to be secondary no matter what. We can't really justify sacrificing people for the economy. What we can do is be very smart about how we open back up, about how we maintain the economy. But the issue right now it's a definitional one in that uh, economy doesn't necessarily mean what we've been taught it has to mean. It doesn't mean that there has to be constant income or constant growth. It just means that trade is happening, and that if you're coming at it from my perspective, the most important thing is that the people that are consuming and the people that are producing are taken care of. I'm coming at it from the people angle, and if they're not being taken care of, then the economy is not. It's not helping. All it's helping is rich people. And right now, that's basically what's happening. And I don't think that's healthy for an economy, personally. Not that I really want to bore you guys with economics and politics, but those are topics that are very interesting to me and are near and dear. So if you're ever interested in discussing that stuff deeper with me, I post pretty regularly on Twitter, and I use Twitter for some art, but a lot of it's politics and economics. And I'm always happy for debates and discussion. Work hard on your illustrations, guys. If you want to do illustration work for a living, and you're looking at places like Magic the Gathering, remember that it's going to be a great deal of it is, mastering the fundamentals of lighting and all the things that we talk about in class, but also it's going to be about your unique voice and how you approach an assignment, because individuality and voice is going to be a major contributor to potentially getting hired. Should definitely, even if you don't think you're ready now to do magic cards, pick your favorite magic cards and try and do your version of them. The best way to get work doing the thing that you want to do is to do the thing you want to do. And if you're an artist, it's to do the thing you want to do and have a portfolio full of it. So if you want to work at Riot and you want to do splashes or something like that, do splashes now. Just do them and make that your focus. Make that the challenge of your personal work. And people will notice, first of all, online, because they're fans of this kind of stuff. So you can do your version of Nico Bolas or something like that and just paint it up, get it going. People will notice, and then over time, as your skills increase, you already have a baked in fan base, and you already have work that supports that you can do that thing, because that's what a portfolio really is. When you're applying for an art job, what they're really looking for is to see if you can do the thing that they want to hire you for to do. That was a terrible sentence, but you understand what I mean. The idea is, if you have a portfolio, most art directors and most concept artists understand that if you are a skilled painter and a skilled designer, that we could hire you for anything and you would do a good job at it, because design and understanding of things like light and form are universal. We understand that you can problem solve those specific things, because that's what it is. The problem is a lot of people that are in hiring, they can't tell that stuff, and they're actually just looking for the actual answer to the problem itself in your portfolio. So if you're trying to get a job and you want to get hired by the hiring people and the money people, answer the question in the portfolio, and it'll improve your chances significantly. I'm not sure what I'm doing here with this guy. Just kind of mindlessly rendering him. Let's make a decision. I was making the classic error of using a small brush too soon. I'm sorry about the bot, you guys. I'm gonna have to go in and refine that a little bit more. I just turned it on. I didn't really look at what the moderator bot does, and it's kind of annoying that it's has issues with foul language and links. I don't know. I don't know why it does that. So I'm gonna go in. I'll refine that so that we don't have problems like these anymore. If you're unsure about the subject of your painting, Irina, the thing to do would be to paint stories that you like. Like, what is a thing that I want to see? Think about it that way. And the rest will sort itself out. We get lumped into character or environment or whatever so fast because we happen to like doing something. But really, I've said this so many times, all this really is problem solving and storytelling. So instead of worrying about the genre of your type of work, think about the stories that you want to see, if that makes sense. Populate the world with the stuff that you feel it's missing, and it'll work out. There's a great there's a great side effect of just painting stuff and designing stuff that you want to see, and that is that by virtue of it being a personal interest, your passion will come through. It'll be very visible in whatever it is you're making, and you won't get burnt out on it. And that's a big problem with people that just decide, I'm going to be the character one, or I'm going to be a car designer. Just be a designer. Just be a painter. Be a storyteller. Hey, thanks for staying so late. We'll see you next time. This is pretty fun, so I might do more during the week. We'll see. It's good for me because, like I said, I don't sketch all that much for myself, and just hanging out is kind of fun. This is cool. I can see the draw. And again, if you guys enjoy it, hit the follow, do all that advertising stuff that I don't understand, and subscribe. Everybody that does that stuff, they say it so fast it just rolls off their tongue. I have no idea. Do all those things for what makes you come back again, and we'll see you. And of course, please do share if you enjoyed hanging out. I kind of wish that the flip horizontal would flip horizontal on the frame where I'm at. It's annoying to have to constantly move the screen around. Happy accidents. When you guys watch streams like this, what else are you doing? Do you paint as you watch, or is it just like in the background? Are you playing Animal Crossing right now? What do you guys get up to when you're watching streams? Because I'm relatively new to it. I haven't been, I'm old basically, and the idea of sitting and watching somebody play video games just mystified me for ages. I thought it was so ridiculous, and now I kind of get it. I don't have streamers that I follow just yet, and I'm more apt to watch sort of compiled or edited down videos of streamers' work online or on YouTube than just watching it real time, because that feels a little bit, I don't know, just time consuming to me. But I'm always curious about that. What do people do when they're watching streams? Interesting. Yeah, I'm liking this setup. A lot of also what blocked me from doing this before was just how much goes into it, and I didn't know things like you can listen to your music while you're Twitch streaming and things like that. It's a lot that I didn't know. Nope, I don't want hair for this guy. Maybe a Manchu? No. Needs something. What do you guys think? What does Bjorn talk about when he's doing his? I watched a couple of them, but like it's the same thing. Like I feel like I should be working when I watch artists in particular. So I get distracted and end up making something else. Oh, that's something been doing lately. I'm trying to teach myself Blender. Um, Christina's posts were pretty inspiring for that, and it seems like it's becoming kind of an industry standard. You know, well, I mean, it has been for quite some time to know 3D as a 2D concept artist. You have to know some 3D, and I learned enough to be able to speak the language when I was working in a studio. But I have not been in a studio for so long that even the tech has completely changed on me. Yeah, it seems like well, Blender is all they're doing a lot of mashing up and compatibility now with things like the new Unreal Engine, and it's like, pooh, the shit that you can do is just crazy cakes. And being able to light and set up a scene like some of you do is so great. And as I've said before, I did experiment with that quite a bit back in the day. Even there are some Magic cards, I hate them now, but there are some that I did like that, where I set up a Blender scene with DAZ and all that and lit it and then just painted over it. But I always didn't like that. I would always be so tempted to leave too much of the 3D in, and it was visible, and I didn't like that in my own work. And it's slow for me. I'm not fast enough yet, but a lot of that's just been I haven't really given it the time that is necessary to master having something like that in the pipeline. You know, it's really tough to change your pipeline, especially when you're old and you've established a way you're doing it already. It's just really tough. Yeah, the new UE stuff is. Oh, not UE. Sorry. Yeah, Unreal Engine. Yeah, I can't even deal with that. But it's also so much work to make it happen. But at the same time, I mean, you can make a whole movie by yourself, and we're gonna see that. There's gonna be a whole lot more, creators that are able to just throw in the time and just do animations on their own. And man, there's so much power in taking out all the extraneous stuff that slows down a production. I'm gonna do a quick details pass. I think I kind of want to have this sketch finished so that I can post it. These are gonna be not a mustache, but barbels, like a fishy man. And I definitely need to do a materials pass since he's going to be kind of fishy and shiny. It's like a blue jade instead. Yeah, Irina, that's basically my issue with it too. Is just that it it's so tempting because so much work is done in the 3D to just leave it because it's done. Why would you repaint something? It's exhausting. But at the same time, it seems to be very effective. You know, the big sell that everybody gives it is that, you know, well, if you make a 3D character and as your concept, then you can do different shots of it and different angles, and you only had to sculpt it once. And yeah, that's true. But generally, I tend to be so much faster just pooping out the character like this. And then, you know, if I need to show different views, almost always a 3D artist can be trusted to just take a really rough sketch and do something great with it. Like, I feel like a lot of concept art that requires, especially in concept art, but illustration too, but if it requires that much figuring out before the next person in line picks it up, that there's not much trust there. There should be trust. Okay, let me do a real quick materials pass, and I think we'll call this one done, and we will shut this beastie down. It was a pretty successful first run. I'm going to do just, oh man, it got so bright in here now, the light coming through the skylight, I can barely see the monitor. It's so bright in here. It's good because you guys can see me, but it's not good because I can't see what I'm trying to do here. Fish with noses is funny, so it's got to be done. Indication is king. Notice how doing something like a really quick rough fill light can make something feel more three-dimensional really fast. This is what I'm talking about when I say multiple light sources. It doesn't take much. It really doesn't. That was too much there. I don't like that. Let's do a new layer. And let's do some real quick, oops. Got them down a little bit. A little too bright. Yeah, the sculpt to paint over pipeline is the one I'm talking about, and I think some people are really good at it. There's a character artist I worked with years ago that I really love, and he's basically a master of that. Brian Winia, or Winia, man, he's so good. He makes these awesome characters, and then and sculpts them, these creatures. He's definitely a great creature artist. Does monsters and all kinds of cool stuff, and then he goes in and touches up, especially like a nice rim light and some colors with Photoshop, and man, it looks so good. Yeah, a lot of the guys that I worked with back in the day at Sony that were 3D artists, man, the shit those guys could do with creatures was so great. What a pleasure it was working with them. What a team. All right. I think that'll do for today's sketch. Um, Definitely, like I said, do the follow and all that good stuff, and we'll do this again and probably pretty regularly. And yeah, join the if you're not on the Patreon, join the Patreon, and we can do crits together and hang out on the Discord and things like that. I'm not sure if anybody's in here that's not in there already, but I will go ahead and close this down. But I'm going to test something, and I want to hear what you guys think about it. So if you'll stick through it, I'm going to do my goodbye, and then I have an outro, which is my ad for the Patreon class. So you don't have to stick through the whole thing. You've probably already seen it, but just let me know if it works, if it's smooth, and all that good stuff. Again, I'm testing all of this out for the first time. I've never done this, so it's interesting. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, gang. As always, paint smart, paint sexy.
Hi there. I'm Izzy, a professional writer, concept artist, and illustrator. I've taught painting for a dozen years or so, on and offline. Many of your favorite illustrators and designers have studied with me or under me and have gone on to teach in their own right. You're here because, like they did, you want to learn to paint realistically for illustration or concept art. Well, worry not. You're in the right place. Grab a seat. I want you to join me as I explain all the aspects of image making in extremely digestible and clear monthly lessons. Not through the lens of silly how to paint hair or eye demos. That shit is carnival tricks. And you're not really learning anything except an exact way to render one thing in one manner. This is painting mysticism at its worst. Watching these kinds of exploitative lessons won't help you level up with your understanding. Sure, now you can paint sparkly hair, but what if you want to paint a dragon, or figure out how to render a sea of fire, or depict a one-eyed transgender space marine dying in the vacuum of space? Painting and image making are tools of communication, and can be learned by anyone willing to put in some time. Like grammar is for language, light, color, and form literally follow a formula. Painting well is not a matter of chicken bones, zombie crackers, and the ever-dismissive concept of talent. Learning with my series, Izzy's Logic of Light and Color, will give you the tools and understanding so you can analyze light and form in reality and bring it to life in your work. Using this simple system I have distilled will help you harness your art to share your ideas as you've always intended. When we are children, we all draw in symbols. Symbols for our house, our hands, the sun, the grass, our pet lobster. As we grow into artists, we must learn to throw away symbols and begin to draw and paint what it is we actually see. And as we grow further, we learn to paint beyond what we see and what is actually there. Until finally we move beyond this and learn to trim away what is actually there so we voice only the ultimate key to controlling value in your paintings. Episodes 5 through 8 are all about rendering materials. Want to understand the logic behind rendering metal, leather, hair, transparency, damn near anything. I even cover the logic behind painting special effects like fire, neon, or lightsabers in later episodes. The lessons just get deeper and more detailed as I build on the foundations covered in preceding episodes. The 10th gives you the most important rule of composition you'll ever learn to keep your images interesting. The next few episodes cover important painting techniques like my edge control ninjutsu or simplification with the large to small system. We dip a toe in color theory, devote a few episodes to finishing full-blown illustrations utilizing the techniques we've learned so far. Some episodes, like the lighting game or Advanced Exercises 1, the shirt, present cheap, valuable, and practical exercises to give you explosive growth in your development. Episodes 22 through 25 cover painting and illustration, just like I do for Magic the Gathering, from assignment and inception to signing the painting at the end. Each one is full of tips, knowledge, everything to make working as an illustrator easier. Did you enjoy learning how to paint basic materials? Metal, wood, and such? I got 3 whole episodes devoted to the intricate logic behind painting different kinds of skin. After that, more lessons devoted to pumping life into your portraits and original methods for accurately drawing faces out of your head. From fundamentals to photo bashing, Gumroad and ArtStation have every lesson I create available for purchase a la carte. But here's an even better way to learn with me. Stay current with my latest lessons on Patreon for the lowest price available. Monthly support gets my student that month's lesson, a critique or paint over of their finished work, a discount code for 25% off the entire Gumroad archive, and access to the Logic of Light and Color Discord community, where we plan future lessons, share knowledge, and learn together as a team. The absolute best method is to join my Patreon classroom at the Student Plus tier, where you'll get everything I just mentioned and a free episode from the archive every month to accelerate your mastery at your own pace. You've decided to take control of your painting and master Izzy's Logic of Light and Color. Now it's up to you to choose the path that's best for you. I'll see you on the flip side. Paint smart, paint sexy.